So I saw James Gunn's Superman, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I really didn't like it. In my opinion, there is a lot to critique and a lot that's frankly gone uncritiqued in this film, but there's also a lot to praise, and I intend to do just that. But I want to start off by saying, as someone who is a massive fan of Henry Cavill as Superman, and as someone who grew up with Brandon Routh as Superman because my dad's a huge fan of Superman Returns, in the same way I am for Man of Steel, it runs in the family, David Cornswood absolutely knocked it out of the park as Superman. There wasn't a single scene where I doubted from his acting that he was Superman. I'm critical of the script, but he really did a great job, and I just wanted to praise that out the gate because I'm not some, weird Snyder cult guy. But I do miss Henry Cavill's aura farming, though. Man, I gotta be honest. But whether it's the flying scenes or the fighting, it just looks absolutely awful, and those are the times I really was struggling to buy that this is Superman. The effects were honestly terrible and goofy. The color was this overly saturated slop vomited over my screen that Gunn's films tend to feature, as though it looks anything other than goofy and plastic and flat, with almost no discernible atmosphere to most shots in the film. It's like a sterile doctor's office. The cinematography was just, again, it was flat and bland, and not a single scene or a single shot in this entire film made me actually feel anything approaching awe or excitement. Not like this scene. Or this scene. And I don't even know what the hell they were doing in every flying and fight scene. It looks like they took the Tony Stark visual effect where it's just Robert Downey Jr.'s face in the suit and then glued it onto a CGI body. Point being, the movie looks visually awful, and these absurd shots are not David Cornswood's fault. He couldn't help that the effects, visuals, sound design, and especially soundtrack utterly pale in comparison when compared to these masterful scenes we did get in Snyder's film. Say what you will about the writing, but especially when Superman was involved. I mean, how do you beat Hans Zimmer? I'm also sick and tired of modern movies foregoing the origin story, particularly superhero films. I know people are tired of the origin story, but I think people really don't understand how crucial it is to get this right for characterization. Imagine just because Harry Potter's popular, a new movie came out that's just, bam, based off the third book, and you have no context for Harry's parents or relation to Voldemort. Just like in the new Sloptastic 4 film, we're dropped in the middle of what feels like the third or fourth installment in a series. And it quickly becomes an excuse to not have good focus on characterization. You get scenes like the one where Lex arrives at the Fortress of Solitude, and he just literally reads verbatim his character motivation regarding Superman. It just outright says that he hates Superman because he's gathered attention, and he's an it, and he wants to destroy him. And then the idiotic, horribly acted engineer chick, look, it's no offense to the actress, it was just not a good performance. She does the same exact thing, explaining in detail how she understands her humanity because she gave it up to be an edge against Superman. I will destroy my credibility for this, and I promise I'm not part of the whole Snyder cult. I promise. But part of the reason I actually did kind of like Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Elon Zucker Musk Luthor performance is because he doesn't just outright tell you his motivation like he's reading from a wiki page. His scenes show you his motivation and his schemes. You get an idea of it very easily.
Am I the only one who understands the complexities of this ambitious cinematic masterpiece? This movie isn't stupid! You're stupid!
Only when him and Superman are face to face and he's making Superman bend to him does he spell out what was previously hinted at and shown for us to figure out. I'll talk more later about this character because it will tie into the bigger reason for this video. So with all that being said, I want to tackle what really bothered me about this film. No, not Lois Lane sucking and being a rude, unapologetic you-know-what, or the fact that they couldn't be bothered to have a dog play Crypto in the non-CGI scenes, so it looks faker than Henry Cavill's upper lip in Joss Whedon's Frankenstein Justice League, or even the fact that a scene exists where Superman heat visions a bunch of goons into oblivion, and they fall out of the sky, and a dimensional rift splits Metropolis apart, but it's like a kid's cartoon because all the bad guys immediately get up and they're just fine, and Metropolis is empty, so who cares if it's split in half and sucked into a black hole? It's like watching baby Superman. Okay, seriously though, back into the big thing. It's Jesus. The big thing is, it's Jesus. It's got a big, giant, religion-shaped hole in it. One common criticism of the Snyder films is that the allegories in relation to Superman are too heavy-handed and miss the point of the character. That Superman isn't some god, but just a guy. But I would argue that people who watched these films somehow missed key parts of Clark's character and arc where he's very human, but nevertheless, the biggest reason this fails is that Superman was originally the creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Both were born to families that fled persecution in Eastern Europe and settled in Glenville, a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. They borrowed heavily from Jewish beliefs and from the Bible. Just like I spoke about in my Has Been Hotel video, the water you swim in, the culture you're raised in, its values and beliefs are unavoidable influences in things you create. Just look at the difference between fantasy like the Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings compared to A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. The former two were made by deeply Christian people like the Anglican Lewis and deeply Catholic Tolkien, whereas the latter was made by Martin, an irreligious, secular, old-school hippie. And you can very easily tell the difference. I mean, with Superman, stuff gets pretty on the nose and heavy-handed at times. Kal-El means literally, from what I can tell, voice of God. And Superman's story is explicitly inspired by and outright based on, at points, the story of Moses. He is born in a place facing annihilation. In sacred scripture, we're told the Israelite children were being slaughtered, and so to protect Moses, he was put in a basket and sent up the river. Superman, Kal-El, is born on a planet which will soon die. To protect him, his parents send him in a small pod to Earth. On Earth, or Egypt, Superman, or Moses, is raised by a foreign people. Whether it's the Gentiles of Egypt or the humans of Earth, the story is so obvious, and both discover their heritage and true purpose later in life, embracing their role as a great figure. The only real key difference is that unlike Moses, who goes back to lead the Israelites with Aaron, Superman doesn't abandon humanity to lead Krypton. It's even better if you read Siegel's unpublished memoirs, by the way, because he states other inspirations for Superman were Samson from the Book of Judges, and the Golem of Prague, who was an indestructible, indefatigable defender of the oppressed. If you know anything about Christianity, anything about Catholicism or Orthodoxy or any traditional Christian faith, you'll know we love typology. Moses is a type of Christ, just like Joseph is. Joseph was hated and betrayed by his own for pieces of silver, sold as a slave, and later imprisoned under false pretenses. One man who is in prison with him dies in his sin, and the other is saved. I've used this example before because of how clear it is, but this is what typology is all about. Moses leads the people out of bondage, out of captivity. Jesus leads all out of bondage to sin. Both are great intercessors with God for the people. Jesus to his heavenly Father for all, and Moses to the Holy Trinity for the people of God. Moses receives the law and gives it to the people. Christ confesses himself to be both the lawgiver and the fulfillment of said law. The motif of 40 days and 40 years being paralleled by the wandering in the wilderness, Moses' time on Mount Sinai and in Christ's time in the desert. Moses was a shepherd, and Jesus is the good shepherd for all of mankind. Both had to flee death as children. Jesus from Herod into Egypt, and Moses the orders of Pharaoh. I could go on all day. The point is that as a Christian, I naturally read the Bible as a whole, and not as a series of chopped up verses and chapters, a categorization technique imposed centuries ago to better organize and condense Scripture, but rather as a holistic series of texts that are all interlinked. And of course, as a Christian, I accept the New Testament. Thus, where I see Moses and Superman, I also see Jesus. And so did others. Many who know of Superman's early history in the comics know he was not originally raised by Martha and Jonathan Kent. Despite the already strong symbolism, it only grew stronger in the years after his creation. Superman's first revision of his original appearance, where he's found by a passersby and sent to an orphanage, has him found by a woman named Mary. You know, like the all-holy and immaculate Lady, the Theotokos, and ever-Virgin Mary, or as my friend and I like to call her, Mom. By the early 50s, Mary became Martha, and random background husband became Jonathan, and Clark Kent was Clark Joseph Kent. You know, a not-so-subtle nod to Joseph, the terror of demons, and patron of the universal church, and foster father of the Lord. Whereas my friend and I like to call him Joseph. Or it could be, you know, his very namesake, the patriarch Joseph from the book of Genesis. And, well, now Superman was raised in Smallville, Kansas, and as a Kansan, can I say that since Superman is a type of Jesus, and he's from Kansas, does that technically mean that Kansas is the Holy Land? Anyways, Superman is raised in a small town, just like Jesus was from the humble small place of Bethlehem. Both Jesus and Clark's foster fathers are simple laborers, one a tecton or carpenter, and the other a farmer. Superman is from the heavens and takes on a human nature by living and breathing and experiencing life as one of us before he knows his full nature as a Kryptonian. Jesus is the only begotten Son of the Father from all eternity, sent to earth to redeem mankind and taking on a human nature, experiencing life as one of us before his inevitable public ministry. With all of those awesome parallels, I would argue that it gets far more explicit over the following decades, and especially with the rightly beloved 1978 Richard Donner film with Christopher Reeves as Superman and Marlon Brando as Jor-El. Jor-El is dressed in resplendent white like an angel or saint, or stretching it here like the Ancient of Days from the book of the prophet Daniel. He says things like this. So a little off the cuff, post-edit Born Stellar here. I have wanted to include clips from the 1978 film here, specifically around Jor-El's farewell to a baby Superman, and later his speech to him. But I just couldn't get it past the Content ID system. Warner Bros. Is just abusing the system, and YouTube is very ridiculous. It's been a very, ancient thing on YouTube, so it's really no surprise to me. But I am just going to have to read out the lines I would have included here, unfortunately, so you can look those up or let your imagination do the rest. So, sorry about that, guys. All that I have, all that I've learned, everything I feel, all this and more, I bequeath you, my son. You will carry me inside you all the days of your life. You will make my strength your own, see my life through your eyes as your life will be seen through mine. The son becomes the father, and the father the son. Even though you've been raised as a human being, you are not one of them. Always hold in your heart the pride of your special heritage. They can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason, above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son. And yet, this film isn't hated like Man of Steel for its beating you over the head with Christ allegories. Now, instead of Superman's parents, Lara and Jor, being merely desperate, Jor takes on a heroic character which was perhaps a little more understated before the Richard Donner film. But it's something I believe only enhances the character, and especially Superman. Superman now embodies the best of both worlds. Kind of like Jesus, wow, look at that. Jesus is God, and yet he is also perfect man. Clark's craft resembles a star like the North Star, which led the three Magi, or wise men, to Jesus. In fact, when Richard Donner rewrote and recasted and pretty much rebuilt the movie from the ground up as pure based America Christian Kino, he got threats to his life for making Marlon Brando God and Superman his son. But not only does Man of Steel directly draw from this, I would argue it actually enhances it. Jor-El isn't just heroic, he condemns Zod for his morals and for taking up the sword against his own people. Jor fights, but only once provoked and having to by necessity. Zod wants to save Krypton, and just like in Superman 2, he led a coup since he was the leader of Krypton's military, but this coup fails. Zod is then punished and sent to the Phantom Zone, which in Superman 2 is described as eternal living death. And in Superman 2, when Zod escapes, he targets Kal-El. In Man of Steel, this is even more clear in its parallels to literally Satan, because Kal has the potential for all Kryptonians in his cells due to Lara and Jor putting the Codex in him. He both figuratively and literally carries the future of Krypton. As Jor says... Another post-edit Born Stellar here. I would have had a clip of Man of Steel here, but Warner Bros. Seems to be specifically targeting the 1978 Richard Donner film, Superman 2025 by James Gunn, and Man of Steel by Zack Snyder. Those are really the only products they seem to be targeting a lot with copyright claims. I haven't gotten any on the Superman animated series cartoon. I haven't gotten any on any clips of Superman Returns that I've tested when trying to get this video out. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the lines again. Sorry for the awkward interruption of the video. Goodbye, my son. Our hopes and dreams now travel with you. You're as much a child of Earth now as you are of Krypton. You can embody the best of both worlds. A dream your mother and I dedicated our lives to preserve. The people of Earth are different from us, it's true. But ultimately, I believe that's a good thing. They won't necessarily make the same mistakes we did. Not if you guide them, Kal. Not if you give them hope. That's what the symbol means. The symbol of the House of El means hope. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good. In Christianity, we believe the same about Jesus. Romans chapter 3 verses 23 to 25 state that all people have sinned and fall short of God's glory, but through God's grace they can be justified as a gift through the redemption found in Jesus Christ. Key word is all. Jor-El tells Cal that he and Lara were as much a product of Krypton's fall as anyone else, people who were fallen, and only through Cal can they have their redemption. It gets even clearer. Jor-El sent Cal to Earth despite knowing Cal would be both like a god to mankind and would be rejected and even worshipped due to his nature. So in the Donner films, this perception is intense, and Man of Steel builds upon it. I would argue, especially in Zod's parallels to, again, Satan. I've spoken in previous videos, especially my Has-Been Hotel video, that many church fathers have speculated that Satan's rebellion was built upon the rejection of the incarnation of the Son of God. Zod calls Lara and Jor having a natural birth heresy and tries to have Cal killed. He wants to harvest the potential in Clark's body to control the future of Krypton, like Satan wanted to do in his failed coup of heaven. He tells Clark that he chose the humans over Krypton before their fight. When the Death of Superman storyline happened, Lois cradled Clark like the Blessed Virgin did her son in Michelangelo's La Pieta. In Kingdom Come, one of the most legendary and excellent DC comics of all time, and the ultimate response to the edgy nihilism of the 90s comic book industry, Superman is explicitly the paragon of virtue, and comes back to save the world from evil, almost giving his life at one point to do it. Much of it paralleling the apocalypse of St. John, or, for normies, the Book of Revelation. Not Revelations, there is no plural. Seriously, if I hear one more normie say Revelations, I'm gonna take a massive gilded Dewey Rhymes Bible and slam it into someone's... Heck, in Smallville, the literal promotional art was Clark hoisted on a cross. When he fights Zod in Season 9, an episode called Salvation, Zod quotes Satan from Paradise Lost and says, "Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven." And then Clark takes a stabbing from Zod's kryptonite dagger, like the spear in Christ's side, the spear of Longinus, and Clark falls in a crucifixion pose. Anyways, the point of all of this rambling is to prove the case that religion and Superman are utterly inseparable. I've touched on Man of Steel already, but I want to really dig deep on why this movie is so special to me, and its sequels Batman v Superman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, and why, with all of the aforementioned religious allegories and symbolisms for the character that are not at all unfounded, I feel James Gunn's Superman badly missed the mark by essentially either leaving out entirely or seemingly mocking the concepts mentioned prior. And one thing I'll lead by pointing out is that Gunn's film is heavily inspired by All-Star Superman, a story where Superman literally sacrifices his life for mankind after healing the incurably sick and promises to return after his sacrifice. This is all to preface just how egregious it is to me that this movie does what it does. In Man of Steel, we see the parallels everywhere, because why wouldn't we? This incredible character, this modern-day myth, was made by Jewish boys drawing from the Bible and Jewish folklore, and we Christians share much in common and again see typology in Old Testament figures. For us, Jesus is the measuring stick by which we measure the rest of the scriptures, and the whole of reality itself. He is literally the Alpha and the Omega. So how does Zack Snyder portray this? By showing a child from the stars, from a war-torn and dying world, choking on its own sins and desire for control over even the cells of its people. I mean, heck, at one point Clark is literally reading Plato's Republic. But we see this child with the Codex, the potential DNA for Kryptonians, come to Earth. And we see him as an adult, casting aside his job to save people trapped on an exploding fiery oil rig. He searches for his purpose on this Earth, growing in wisdom. I'll never understand how it's acceptable for Superman and Gunn's movie to talk about the stench of Baravia's leader's piss and threaten his life, but Superman beating Zod into the Earth for threatening his mom or turning this douchebag semi-truck into a pincushion for him groping and harassing women is somehow unacceptable. I don't know, man. Call me crazy, but seems like a double standard. Anyways, we see him grow and be human, but also become the symbol of hope. His strong sense of justice to the guy harassing the waitress and his saving of Lois Lane in the Kryptonian scout ship shows how he cares for people. We see his incredible power demonstrated in a scene which frankly outclasses anything before or since. And when he's first preparing to take flight, his father from the heavens tells him of his power, his abilities. When Clark asks Jor-El why he's so different from humans, he answers him, saying that Earth's sun is younger and brighter than Krypton's was, that Clark's body has taken in its radiation, that it's strengthened his muscles, his skin, his senses. Earth has a weaker gravity, but its atmosphere is more nourishing. But more than any of that, he says the following words: You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun, Cal. Humanity will join its savior in the light one day. The man whose name means voice of God, like how Christ is the Logos, the eternal word of the Father. And his human father dies before he reveals himself to the world. Just like how St. Joseph is never mentioned past Christ's visit to the temple in the Gospel of St. Luke. Jonathan dies because it's not yet Clark's time. Jesus had to be about his father's business in his father's house, but he went home, submitting himself to his parents and growing in wisdom. Clark had to learn of his people, searching, traveling, saving people, before donning that suit and revealing himself to the world. Jor-El later says, "We wanted you to learn what it meant to be human first, so that one day, when the time was right, you could be the bridge between two peoples." Jor-El also says that not only can Cal save Lois, but he can save all of them, meaning all of humanity. And Clark strikes this killer Jesus pose and then rockets to the Earth to save Lois. We see Superman make mistakes. He has a temper about him. It reminds me a lot of the Bruce Timm animated series and how he has a very human temper and struggle to be good in a world that he's not sure will accept him. He came into his own, but his own received him not. This is an area I want to compliment Gunn's Superman on. I like that we get to see Superman get angry, get depressed. But for some reason, when these films do it, that's a big hecking no-no because there aren't enough bright colors or smiles.
This movie isn't stupid! You're stupid!
When Krypto is taken by Lex Luthor, Clark rages into his office and clearly wants to hurt him, but he restrains himself. And when he finds out his parents are apparently evil gooners, it depresses him. He spends much of the film depressed, actually. And this is also one of my biggest criticisms of Gunn's film. Not Superman being big sad, but the portrayal of Jor-El. I find it to be utterly uncompelling slop that Jor-El was evil, and before anyone tries to type a comment that Lex Luthor edited it, no, James Gunn confirmed that the video message in the movie is real.
The biggest question that people have asked, probably you already, is about Jor-El and Lara's message. Is it real? Has it been doctored? Is that the actual
How
message?
can someone not think it's real?
I'm just saying.
How can someone? I don't understand. Like we did this. So in the test screens, people were like, "Is it real?" You know, with AI, nobody trusts anything.
Jor-El over time went from a desperate man to a desperate and very noble and heroic scientist who was trying to save his world, but his warnings were not heeded. So he saved the only thing he could, his son. And now this recent trend in the comics has made Jor-El evil. Ooh, Superman's dad is evil? It's just so derivative. You already have Zod as the representation of the ills and evils of Krypton. That utterly horrendous, unwatchable abomination that is My Adventures with Superman does this too. It takes away from Superman being the embodiment for good, and as you can see with much of this video, I don't like it when Superman's religious symbolism and significance is taken away from. Kal-El, Clark Kent, being the embodiment of the best humanity has to offer and the best Krypton had to offer, adds to his significance and his struggle. He wants to be a normal guy like anyone else. He wants to belong. It's what he's always wanted. But his birth dictated that he would be special, one of the most special people ever. I understand the speech from Superman to Lex Luthor in this movie being that he is a human, a person like any other. He struggles, he gets scared, he doesn't know what to do when he tries his best. But to be honest, I feel like Man of Steel portrays this repeatedly in a profound way. Clark wandering the world in search of his purpose seems odd to other people, but to me, it just expresses Clark's desire to belong. In the real world, people would be terrified and awestruck and suspicious of someone like Superman. Clark knows it in Man of Steel, and that's his fear. It was his father's fear, too. Many people have criticized the infamous scene in Man of Steel where Jonathan Kent chastises Clark for saving people on a bus. Jonathan says what he does because he's concerned for his son's ability to live a normal life. I always thought the scene is pretty clear in its meaning. Jonathan is concerned and afraid because he predicts, rightly, that people will be afraid of Clark because they fear what they don't understand. It's precisely here where he reveals Clark's alien nature, that he was found in a pod. Jonathan recognizes the reality of his son's earth-shattering existence and wants him to have the choice to stand proud in front of the world or to choose something else. Not because he doesn't want Clark to do good, but because he's his dad and doesn't feel it fair that his son has such a burden. Clark doesn't want to be a farmer. He wants to be important. But it's precisely his father's words and his death that remind him that something as simple as feeding people by farming is important. That while Clark's nature will change humanity, it's his normal life that remains the core of why being human is so important. And, it may seem to some that I'm criticizing Gunn's film only to praise the very thing that the aforementioned speech is all about, but it's precisely my point that removing the religious symbolism, removing this kind of struggle, and only telling us and not showing us makes the point about Clark wanting to be a normal person, and honestly being a normal person in many ways, fall flat on its face. One of the best episodes of Justice League Unlimited, and one of the best episodes of the DC animated universe in general, is an episode titled For the Man Who Has Everything. In it, Batman and Wonder Woman arrive at the Fortress of Solitude to give birthday gifts to Superman, but they discover him in a trance from a creature called a Black Mercy and discover the scheme of Mongol to incapacitate Superman so he can conquer the Earth. The Black Mercy shows you a dream world of what you desire, what you yearn for the most. Throughout the episode, we see Clark living on Krypton with a wife and son. He's just a normal guy, and his dad's forewarnings of Krypton's destruction just never came true. For the man who has everything, he can't get the one thing he truly desires: a peaceful, normal, mundane life in a world where he doesn't shake the foundations of people's worldviews just by existing, and one where he isn't obligated with this sense of duty because he's just as normal as anyone else. He still does good, pursues it, but he's normal. In Man of Steel, we see Clark years after his father's death as a wayward soul trying to figure out why he was sent to Earth. And wherever he goes, he feels he has to disappear when he helps people because he's felt the sting of rejection before. And because he just can't help himself but save people when they need the man who can do things others can't. Superman learning about Krypton from his father's consciousness and learning to take flight is one of the most incredible sequences in any superhero film, and the score from Hans Zimmer is rightly beloved as one of his best works. Clark dons the suit and eventually heads home. But when Zod comes knocking, he knows he has a choice. Clark's struggle to save and help people before his time has come is like Christ at the wedding at Cana when his mother told him, "They have no wine." And he said, "Woman, what does this have to do with thee or me? My hour has not yet come." And yet he still listened to his mother's simple ask and turned water into wine. Like Christ in the temple as a child teaching the scribes and Pharisees the scriptures, he ultimately submitted to his parents' will and grew in wisdom and stature, later revealing himself when he was in his 30s. Clark in Man of Steel goes to a church and is silhouetted by a stained glass depiction of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he struggled so hard with the cup he would take up that he sweat blood. Clark doesn't think Zod can be trusted, but his fears about humanity's being able to be trusted are present, as they have been for much of his life, and as they will continue to be. When Clark turns himself in, we see those fears materialize, and we see them given form in Zod. When Clark is brought aboard Zod's ship, Zod tries to get him to choose between Earth and Krypton. Clark embodies the best of both worlds, but Zod only wants Krypton, to exterminate humanity so he can build a new world in his ideal image. Once again, the parallels to Satan should be clear. As mentioned earlier in the video, many church fathers speculated that Satan's rebellion was principally motivated by his hatred of God planning to incarnate as man. The belief that it's beneath God. This humbling of God himself is paradoxically beautiful. It is the kenosis, the emptying or pouring out of God to live and breathe and die as man. We see this paralleled in Clark, who has not conquered Earth with his power, but is like a vagabond at this time, whereas Zod wants to exterminate mankind for the sake of his own, seeing them as lesser and living in squalor. Jor tells Clark that he can save mankind, all of mankind, and Superman makes his choice on the Black Zero. And when he stops Zod later in the movie from shooting down the aircraft which will take down said ship, he chooses mankind. Not because he wanted to choose between both, but because Zod forced his hand. He fights to save Earth and keep Earth as it is, human and flawed and ugly and chaotic, but also beautiful and free and, well, again, human. He battles the World Engine, being poisoned by Krypton's atmosphere, but fighting it anyway. Do you get the theme of the movie? He's fighting his heritage from Krypton and the temptation from Zod, You get the theme, do you get it? In Gunn's Superman, Superman is angry his Kryptonian parents turn out to be bastards who want him to conquer Earth and make a harem, and I'm sorry, but can I just talk about how annoyingly unfunny this joke was? They bring up harems like 5 times in a row. We get it, James. You want a harem. Can you stop mentioning it? Anyways, I understand this idea, but for me, it doesn't hit the same at all. It's a similar theme to Man of Steel's in Clark trying to find his place in the world, but this doesn't work for a number of reasons. One, Jor and Lara being evil doesn't really add anything to Superman's character. The idea is supposed to be that he chose good despite what was intended by his biological parents, but he didn't know about this until he was like 30 and already Superman for 3 entire years. If there's supposed to be a conflict between Clark and his heritage, it's a bit of a non-starter, and also, as mentioned earlier, this movie has way too much going on. It's tackling the question of Superman's place in the world, but also tackling the question of whether he can interfere in foreign conflicts and human affairs, but he's already proven himself for 3 years, so people turning on him on a dime just seems goofy and not explored enough. And again, while I get what the movie is going for, that no matter what, even if people want him to be something different, he'll always save people, I find that regardless of the waves of criticism at Snyder's films, he was right to first tackle Superman's place in the world and address the soul of him, his purpose, and then to use the next film to directly challenge that very thing. Instead, in Superman, we have the Justice Gang and interdimensional entities and kaiju and pocket dimensions and clones and Lex Luthor's greed and Lex has a cult and Superman's parents are actually evil and people turn on him, and I feel like this movie hardly stopped to catch its breath. In Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Justice League, they all have more of a Dune approach. There's this rising tension and, of course, a bit of middle action scenes to keep the plot going, but it all reaches a climax. In Superman, I feel like it was a far more unfocused film. I like Superman saving the squirrel, okay? I like the scene of the man he saved being shot and Superman suffering in Lex's pocket dimension, but this movie ironically suffers far more from the same problem of Batman v Superman, yet seems to not get any criticism for it. There's far too much setup and not enough payoff. We're just dropped in the middle of this story. The soul of Superman, who he is, the ethics and ideals he embodies, is someone who will always do what's right and choose to do his best. I think, at least, a strength of this movie is that it gets this across, but it poorly communicates it in my opinion. This very issue of Superman's virtue and character is often a point of discussion in Man of Steel. The movie ends with Superman being forced to kill Zod and his people to save mankind. He is in utter anguish at having to take Zod's life, but he had no choice. Clark had no prison to contain Zod, no convenient way out of the violence he would bring on all mankind. And this is where I want to briefly address the idea that Superman never kills. He does. He totally does. Superman chooses not to kill because he wants to always see the best in people and find another way. He's super intelligent, extremely powerful, and generally never needs to do such a thing. But he doesn't have the Batman defense of I'll lose my mind and become a mass-killing psychopath if I kill literally worse than any serial killer ever, also known as the Joker. Generally speaking, Superman is deontological and appeals to virtue ethics, as opposed to things like consequentialist ethics. He appeals to doing the right thing no matter what, regardless of the outcome. The truth is, Clark will and has, when he has no way out of it without costing countless lives, kill. And speaking of a no-kill rule, this will tie in nicely with the next Snyder film, Batman v Superman. Boy, I have never seen a more unjustly overhated movie in my life. You'd think this movie shot everyone's dogs the way they talk about it. And like it or not, The theatrical release, cutting a literal half hour of plot and character-heavy content, heavily contributed to this. Unlike in Gunn's Superman, where these overarching questions are all bundled into one bloated movie, we get to see them explored more in depth. Superman made his choice to stand proud in front of the human race. He saved the world, but those lingering questions, that fear his dad had, that fear he had, has not gone away. In fact, this whole movie is about the nature of mankind and whether someone good like Superman can exist. Plato once predicted in startling clarity what would eventually happen to Jesus Christ. Quote, "They will say that the just man who was thought to be unjust will be scourged, racked, bound, will have his eyes burnt out, and at last, after suffering every kind of evil, he will be impaled or crucified. Let him, the perfectly just man, be the best of men, and let him be thought the worst. Then he will be put to the proof, and we shall see whether he will be affected by the fear of infamy and its consequences. And let the unjust man be the worst of men, and let him be reputed the best. Then we shall see whether his injustice is profitable to him." Unquote. Now, this is of course in immediate reference to Socrates, and he concludes that we should desire to seem just, but it rings true nonetheless. Like the high priest Caiaphas, unintentionally prophesying Christ should die for all in the Gospels, despite having a totally different intention by what he was saying. Regardless, Batman v Superman is all about this question, the Epicurean dilemma. Much like in Gunn's Superman, in BVS, Clark interferes in a foreign country to save Lois Lane. And it does have horrible unintended consequences. People get massacred in retaliation, but we of course know, especially in the Ultimate Edition, that Superman is being framed for the slaughter in the desert which caused this retaliation. Superman's foil in this movie, more than anyone, is Bruce Wayne, Batman. And I also want to preface this by saying having Batman kill is just something I don't have a massive freakout over. Batman delving low, falling deep into his own sins and broken psyche doesn't bother me at all. In fact, it's why this version of the character is one of my favorites of all time. I understand the criticism that this supposedly conflicts with who he is as a character, but I just disagree entirely. This is supposed to show Batman at his lowest, and between this and the next film, we see him redeem himself and change, reclaiming who he once was. In fact, I find that despite it being maligned as an entirely cynical and overly edgy portrayal of the character, it actually presents one of the most hopeful, given it brings Batman to his lowest low, but still has him bounce back and come to redemption and change. It's a fundamentally hopeful view, that despite Bruce's greatest fears, even if he crosses that red line in the sand, he can truly still choose to be good. But I digress. I'm getting ahead of myself. In Batman v Superman, we see the same question of whether Superman should interfere explored in a much more direct manner, and we also see the issue of his humanity addressed in a way I personally find much more poignant. And as far as Bruce Wayne is concerned, he's struggling very hard at the beginning of this film after 20 years to find meaning in his crusade. And Superman arrives, and thousands die. Remember, it was he who, albeit unintentionally, brought the Kryptonians to Earth. Bruce sees the very existence of this demigod figure to be a threat to humanity. Superman is just trying to do good, stand proud like his fathers both wanted, but humanity is turning on him. Some see him as a messiah, others as a dangerous devil, and precious few as a man just trying to do the right thing at all times, who just happens to have extraordinary powers. We see people clinging to him when he saves a woman from a burning building, and all the while Bruce embodies the fear that Clark and Jonathan had, and even Lara before her and Jor sent Clark to Earth. After all, someone with that much power must be too good to be true, right? Bruce in this movie is someone who has lost hope. He's given into savagery. He brands people, which essentially marks them for death. Superman wants to embody the good of man, to bring them into the sun, as Jor spoke of. Is this really any different from Gunn's Superman on this point? I'm convinced that people refuse to see past the particular visuals and atmosphere in Snyder's film to see what is truly in the film and what's being said. Anyways, Batman has become a killer. He's bitter, resentful, poisoned by the years of fighting. And so he convinces himself that this potential threat, no matter how remote, and ending it, is the only thing he will do in his life with a lasting impact. He has visions and nightmares reinforcing this idea. Bruce embodies the paranoia, the rejection of good, the incredulous hate of someone so good serving mankind with humility. He sees Clark's abilities and nature and uses it to reject the idea that he is truly human. Meanwhile, Clark is trying to stop Bruce and serve as a bulwark against injustice, to show us a better way, as both his sets of parents believed he could. But everywhere he goes, he makes ripples. People end up hurt, and it raises the question of whether Superman's very existence invites chaos. It is again the testing of the very ideal from Man of Steel in the hardest of ways. Clark's struggle to be human, his struggle to stand proud in front of the human race, his struggle to embody all that is good. And it's a theme which a superimposed Gaza and Israel conflict in Gunn's film will never reach the heights of, because Snyder's films are concerned with a much bigger question, the nature of mankind itself and our relation to the good, to God. You see Clark's fears about the human race brought to the forefront, but more than that, his own insecurities. When Wallace Keefe, Wally, the man Bruce helped in Metropolis during Clark and Zod's fight, is in the movie. In Metropolis, he lost his legs. Then he lost his wife, his home, everything. Lex manipulates this because in Lex's mind, just like Bruce's, Clark is too good to be true. He has framed Superman, fomented hate against him, made the world's fears become magnified, and he does it again. We see Clark try his best to come down and condescend, to talk with people about the effects he's had on the world, to try his best to understand and to help the world understand him. And what does he get for it? Congress blown up by Lex Luthor. It's in this moment that Clark reaches a low point. He's been so concerned with justice for the little guy, even against Batman and Gotham, that he's worried he's become caught up in his own pride. That the dream he embodies is pointless because he only brings more trouble and conflict. We see this insecurity and sense of failure in the voice of his father, when he goes to the mountain to retreat into a place where he can think and get his bearings, like Christ withdrawing after his cousin St. John the Baptist was killed by Herod. And all of this is being orchestrated by this absolutely petty, evil gremlin of a human being. And it's here again I'd like to interject and say once more that I get why people hate Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of the character. I really do. His personality feels off, it's just very jittery and awkward, and it just feels like Reddit speak the entire time. Now, I may be a weirdo, but I find the cringe kind of endearing. Like, I don't know, if Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg had a kid with Asperger's, and hey, I'm allowed to say that, I have autism, okay? But I feel that Snyder's Lex, no matter how much one might find the 1A scene in Gunn's film to be absolutely hype, and Snyder's Lex annoying or cringe or even distasteful, tackles a much bigger question than the one in Gunn's film, and ironically gets to the core of the irony of Lex's hatred in a better way. Gunn was more concerned with the contemporary geopolitics and statements on immigration when it comes to Superman's nature as a human. And with Lex, he's more concerned with Luthor's envy and insecurity in terms of power alone. Gunn's Lex hates that he's weak in comparison to Superman, and while that is in a lot of ways comic accurate, without the juxtaposition of what Superman is and what he represents, Lex's petty hatred seems entirely misguided. It feels misplaced in the story. If one looks at All-Star Superman, Lex is precisely right about Superman's importance as more than just a mere man. But this is contrasted by Superman's humility and meekness. It's a form of irony. But if Superman is kind of just some guy with power, and there isn't that narrative tension between what he is and who he is, the godlike Kryptonian and his Boy Scout personality and self, it feels almost like Lex's hatred belongs in another story against another Superman. I say this because it feels like Superman's humanity is emphasized almost to the exclusion of Superman's nature as a Kryptonian in James Gunn's film. We have to have this obnoxious therapy speak the entire film, and people pretend that this is how Superman always was. Go watch the Bruce Timm animated series. Superman isn't a limp-wristed idiot who in every fight is trying to talk his way out of it at all times. There isn't this constant expository dialogue where everyone talks about how vulnerable they are. It reminds me of watching Thunderbolts, where they hug the villain to death. Superman knows when and when not to mean business. There's this emphasizing of his vulnerability in Gunn's film to the point of taking the super out of Superman. And that's a lot of what I'm getting at. Superman is a modern mythical figure who is juxtaposed by the fact that he loves people and is so very down to earth. This Superman tries to do that, but ends up with someone who isn't mythical at all and feels so down to earth there isn't a juxtaposition. It's as if Gunn was writing a Spider-Man film instead of a Superman film. That's why Superman's speech, and why him watching home videos in the Fortress of Solitude instead of Jor-El-Lar's message at the end of the film, both fall flat for me. The film's theme in isolation, without its political meta-commentary, is basically, what? Be human? That people who are different are people too? It's pathetic. Gunn couldn't have been more obvious if he wanted. Having his action figures beat up the army of not Israel, or not Russia, I guess, and not Netanyahu, despite speaking and acting like him, and, you know, the rich mogul who wants land in this poor, oppressed country and has a cult following. I mean, come on. I'm sorry, but without this performance by Nicholas Hoult, purely in isolation from the rest of the film, I will unironically take Eisenberg's performance, which I know, crucify me, don't mind much. Batman v Superman is concerned with the question of whether an all-good God can truly also be all-powerful. That is a major theme with discourse around Superman in the fandom and in universe in the comics. Gunn's Superman is concerned with the question of whether we should stop Israel or not, and whether Superman can be human if he's a foreigner. Luthor in BVS wants more than clout and attention and land and money. He wants to expose Superman to the world, and not just a video of his parents. He wants to prove Clark is not all good. He brings Clark low, makes him retreat into the wilderness for a time. The same thing Superman in Gunn's film does, by the way, except in this film it's because he paints Clark's entire crusade as flawed, dangerous, and wrong. Superman embodies everything he disagrees with in the world. Good for good's sake, charity, compassion, hope. Lex Luthor appeals to both Superman's fears and Batman's fears. He seemingly vindicates every single fear Superman has had about humanity. Lex Luthor framed Clark for killing people in the desert, led people to falsely testify against him, who he later had whacked, and fed Bruce's greatest fears and insecurities and bitterness by appealing to them, feeding the fear that Bruce felt that all of his work would amount to nothing. Lex killed his own assistant and dozens in the Capitol with a lead-lined Trojan horse, Wally's wheelchair. Lex Luthor has orchestrated everything by spreading his own cynical, atheist, nihilistic worldview. We see in Lex Luthor almost like the embodiment of this idea that characters like Superman are boring or dumb because they're fundamentally good, like a raging little chudcell angry at happiness, and the nihilistic idea that a fundamentally good God cannot exist alongside suffering, of laying at the foot of God all of mankind's mistakes and blaming him rather than ourselves. Lex would rather be a monster, an abomination before the entire world, than buy into the supposed lie of a truly good man, and of a savior. Nothing offends him more than true goodness and real power being wielded alongside one another. And meanwhile, that fear, that want for control over what we don't understand, the suspicion of those with power, but more than anything, the fear of what our legacy will be, all of that continues to spiral in Batman, who steals kryptonite from Lex. But Luthor in time captures Lois Lane and uses her to draw Superman out, because he knows he'll always save her. And this is where his motivation becomes most apparent. He has kidnapped Clark's mom and makes him kneel. He explicitly, finally states his motivation clearly. The belief that Superman as this god figure can either not be all-powerful or not be all good. And it's by threatening Martha that he can force Bruce and him to fight. Man versus God in his own view. And that's exactly what they do. Clark is desperate and Bruce is blinded by his own sin. In many ways, it's both of them at their absolute lowest low point. Bruce willing to kill a good man. He fills Superman with fear. But it's in this that in the much memed and hated Martha scene, that we get the exact same theme as the Gunn film, and I have to ask again, did I watch the same film as everyone else?
Am I the only one who understands the complexities of this ambitious cinematic masterpiece? You're stupid!
One surely can criticize the presentation without missing what is right in front of you. This theme of religion, of God and man, is central to Superman, and this scene is in many ways a culmination of what the film has been trying to get across. All of the darkness, the brooding, the edgy presentation has all been for a purpose. It's when Bruce finally sees Superman as Clark Kent and understands that Clark is just as human as he is. Or rather, Clark is more human than he is. Bruce has become a monster, claiming his humanity as his badge of honor, quite like Lex in that regard. But it's here that he sees more than the symbols and sees the man underneath, the good man, a symbol of hope and goodness, who has a mother just like he did. And in this story, Bruce and Lex both represent most people in a lot of ways. We all fall short of the glory of God, but some choose to follow a path of redemption despite their countless sins, and others would rather choose eternal hellfire than dare set aside their own selves. And I don't think I'm stretching by emphasizing the religious symbolism here in drawing a parallel to Christ. He is human, yet God, perfect man and divine. He never sinned. He drew all things to himself and became a curse for our sake. And this parallel is most evident at this point in the movie. This is where we see Bruce start the path to redemption by saving Clark's mother. You know, he isn't quite there yet, his anger still bubbling beneath the surface, but he gets the chance to rectify some of his mistakes, and the chance to do what he's always dreamt of doing, and save a poor, innocent woman, a boy's mother, from senseless violence. This is where we begin to see the true Bruce Wayne, the Batman, begin to shine through, but it's going to take time to heal. Bruce has been so embittered, even stating to Clark that Clark wasn't special, that the world has no meaning except for when you force it to make sense. But Clark represents something else, something so much more, that there is inherent meaning in the world. There is good. And we see that in Lex Luthor's pettiness, Bruce can be redeemed, but Lex cannot. In his words, if man won't kill God, then maybe the devil will. But this abomination, Doomsday, is made by a man's schemes, Lex Luthor, and it being Zod's corpse that was turned into Doomsday is quite fitting, given his parallels to the devil. Superman has to confront the literal embodiment of the darkness of mankind, and of the anguish he feels at the death of his people and having to kill Zod. All of his worst fears made manifest. Humanity's failings and unworthiness, his own people's rejection of him, the world's rejection of him given form. And, well, we all know how this story ends. Just like in the comics, Superman in the end has to stop Doomsday at the cost of his own life. Just before it, he regains his heart and realizes his mission is not only necessary, but good for the sake of all. That he should give his life for this world because it's his world too. All of this darkness in this film has a point. Superman's death bringing down Doomsday has a specific purpose. In a lot of ways, I see BVS as a microcosm of the fandom at the time. Gunn's film, with its spectacular and bombastic bright colors and cheery tone and plastic feel, may be big now, but this movie came out in 2016, and we all remember the 2010s era and its edginess. This movie, despite being very edgy, has a fundamentally hopeful message. Just like with Christ dying by all worldly measures a reject and failure, he not only rose again but came to encompass the whole world, the apostles and their successors, fulfilling the Great Commission to baptize the nations. When Superman is dead, it says, if you want to see his monument, look around you. And at Clark's funeral, we see Diana, Wonder Woman, and she also has a role to play here. I know I haven't mentioned her much, but frankly, given that this movie got flack for a 5-minute scene of the Justice League and the inclusion of Wonder Woman, meanwhile Gunn's Superman has 12.5 characters we barely know, and it's bloated to hell and not many seem bothered by it, well, it is what it is. Anyways, Diana, as someone who fought alongside mankind but who left the world because of its horrors and evil and depravity, isn't so confident the world will get better after Superman's death. But Bruce finally voices what the movie was getting across. Men are still good. In his words, men are still good. We fight, we kill, we betray one another, but we can rebuild. We can do better. We will. We have to. I know I've bloviated about BVS, but this is the crux of the issue to me. Superman is a Moses figure and was intended to be so, and in many ways is a Christ figure, even dying and being pierced for the sins of mankind and, eventually rising again. This entire movie, which is so hated, to me, represents a great mirror to Gunn's film. Jonathan Kent telling Clark in Gunn's Superman that parents aren't here to make you pick up a certain legacy. His Kryptonian parents being evil gooners, the downright cartoonish tone, the bloated cast, the rejection of any and all religious symbolism in Superman all seems like direct and indirect responses to Snyder's film, but especially to Batman v Superman. Gunn's Superman, in my opinion, doesn't touch on the same deep, complex moral questions and confrontations between nihilism and faith, fear and hope. In Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, Clark has a legacy to live up to. He feels the need to do good. Martha tells him to be everyone's hero or symbol, or be none of it. That he doesn't owe the world a thing. In the same way, God doesn't owe us anything. We're entirely contingent, created things, subject to Him. But He loves us so much that He gave His only begotten Son to die on the cross for our sake. Clark delves into human darkness and defeats our devils, even with his death. And yet we still get the same message of his humanity, his struggles, his fears, his insecurities, his failures, all across without needing a monologue for it. If being good for the sake of being good is punk, then I'd say that in a time of peak edgy media, making a movie where the tone and atmosphere of the film is ultimately contrasted with an extremely hopeful message about redemption, even from our worst, lowest fall, and the message that mankind is still good, is worth fighting for, even amidst the darkness, is pretty punk in itself. Clark having this nigh unbearable legacy and not wanting to have to live up to it, but knowing it's the right thing to do, just reminds me of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, like that scene in Man of Steel. Christ had prayed that the cup pass from him, but if not, then his Father's will be done. It's no coincidence that when Clark is considering turning himself into Zod, he goes to a church and talks with the priest, and you see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane right behind Clark. The point being, this religious symbolism to me isn't just window dressing, it's integral to Superman as a character. And it only enhances the story. Superhero stories are modern myths, and there's no greater archetype, no greater permeating myth than the life and the story of Jesus Christ. And we get to see this further explored in the criminally delayed and underrated Snyder cut of the Justice League movie. Arthur is a man who doesn't care about saving the world, yet he helps people. He's a loner. Barry's father is wrongfully imprisoned and wants Barry to give up on him, but Barry refuses. Diana and Bruce are still learning to heal and to be heroes again in their own ways. In the heart of this film, Victor is a broken boy who lost his mother and whose father was never there for him, only to bring him back as a mostly machine monster. Everyone in the Justice League is broken in their own way, and it's in the absence of Superman that the devils and destroyers from realms beyond come to swarm our world and destroy it, to remake it in their image. Whether it's Barry's search for meaning, his insecurity about being a hero, and his drive to make something of himself, or Victor's struggle to accept himself for what he is now, to take this new lease on life and make something of it, or Arthur's reluctance to get involved and save people, we see the impact that Clark, that Kal-El, has had on the world. The evil scatters in his wake and gathers when he's gone, and the people he's left behind have to fight this evil and await his return. Sound familiar? This film is a beautiful message of hope and something we would likely never have gotten had it not been for the COVID lockdowns. And I find it tragically fitting that such an incredible 4-hour epic won't get a sequel, given it really only came to this state out of the tragedy of Zack Snyder losing his daughter. Man of Steel was a realistic view of Superman, someone coming to accept who he is and his mission before the world, taking his first steps as a hero. Batman v Superman was the darkest hour, all of the world's worst aspects made manifest, leading to Clark learning the long way around what it means to be a hero. But Justice League, the Snyder Cut, that is the culmination of this journey, and it makes all of it worth it. And aside from the incredible writing and story of Victor, Cyborg, the other grand highlight of this film to me is Bruce. All of the darkness, the failures, the bloodlust and hatred and self-loathing of the previous film is replaced by an intense guilt. And like St. Paul, he goes around the world spreading this message and gathering a team to stop the approaching evil and destruction of Steppenwolf, who serves a literal evil dark god on a planet in a universe of slavery, torture, and fire. Batman had no faith in the previous film. But here is a man driven by both faith and guilt. Diana has seen the horrors of mankind, but it is she who encourages Victor to do good, to help this crusade, because she's seen again the goodness of the world and awoken from that slumber that blinds us to the good in the world and the good that we must do. And back to Bruce. Even Alfred tells Bruce that he's done an amazing job, changed so much for the better, and gotten his team together, fulfilled his promise. But to try and bring Superman back from the dead is just too much. He says that his guilt has overcome his reason, but Bruce tells him that for once, he's operating strictly on faith. When Superman is brought back from the dead, it's when Lois was finally about to give up and move on. But she gets to be reunited with him. Batman gets to let go of his guilt, absolved of his greatest mistake. And when they go to stop Steppenwolf, Alfred asks him, "How do you know he'll come?" And he says,
Faith, Alfred. Faith.
and amidst this movie of hope, sadly, Victor loses his father. This broken boy turned part machine is the soul of this film. We get to see his anguish at who he is, at being so different. And I can't help but notice a parallel to Man of Steel and Clark's struggle to accept himself and his origins, his search for meaning. Victor uses his abilities to help a struggling single mother who has almost lost everything. And it's in that we see these acts of charity and kindness and goodness, the gospel, lived. It's Victor who is the one who interfaces with the Mother Box, who helps everyone to realize they can bring Superman back. And in the final battle, he's the one who has to stop the Unity, to stop the Mother Boxes from sinking. And it's right before this last grand battle that we get this incredible, simply sublime part of the film, where not only does Clark return and embrace his resurrection and reunite with Lois and his mother, but he goes back to that Kryptonian scout ship where he first donned that suit bearing the symbol of the House of El, that symbol that means hope. And we hear both of his fathers speaking to him, lines from Man of Steel about his role in the world, how his very existence will change the world, but more than that, how they're proud of him, how humanity will join him in the sun, and that it's time for him to fly. This alone encapsulates something these movies touch on with someone like Superman existing that Gunn's film just simply can't do. He isn't just one hero among many, he's the hero. And not just because he's good, but because of what he represents and the power he wields, and the fact that he remains good despite it all. In the previous film, Clark stated at one point that no one stays good in this world, but he himself proved that wrong. Not only do we see Clark's return, Arthur fight alongside the League to save mankind, Diana return to being a hero, Bruce embracing not only being Batman again and not a killer, but a leader as well, but as great as all that is, we see Barry push himself to his limit, making a better future, a better world, and yet another incredible sequence that I am simply flabbergasted didn't make it into Whedon's version. We see Barry turn back time to stop the moment of victory for Darkseid. And between these various incredible payoffs and moments in this movie, we get one more with Victor speaking to the Mother Boxes. They tempt him with a healed body, with his parents, tell him they can fix him, like the devil whispering in his ear, but he just responds with,
I'm not broken.
Bruce says that you do fight for this red cape because this red cape charges back at the bull. We see this beautiful focus on Clark as the central point of this film. They need him to come back to defeat the darkness, just like we need Christ to defeat the darkness in our hearts and in all of the world. We needed him to destroy death, and we need him to resurrect us. Paul says, quoting Plato, for in you, God, we live and move and have our being. And you see this wonderful focus in the Justice League movie, in the Snyder Cut, of bringing Superman back so that we can drive out the darkness. All these people are rallied by Superman's heroism, by his virtue, by what he represents, by what he can do. That's what motivates all of them to change, to be better, to be heroes. The faith of Bruce and his redemption, the way Diana and Arthur learn to come back to the world and save mankind, someone like Barry choosing to be a hero, Clark's resurrection and return as Superman, and a brand new light shining in the darkness. All of this represents a message that I would find it hard to believe isn't intentionally, fundamentally Christian. And that Christian message only enhances, elevates, and transforms the iconic characters in the story itself into something even greater. Gunn's film is just one so far, but a flawed one, and also one I know many people love. But I hope I've been able to get you to reevaluate the archetypes and tropes around Superman. This quintessential superhero, his symbolism, what he represents, and why in a story of Superman fighting evil, not only does religious symbolism have its place, it belongs. And with that, as I believe, the story feels incomplete without it. Superman is a man, a good man who gets scared, who has fear, who struggles. He doesn't know the future. He gets lonely, but he represents so much more than just the everyman. And that's something that Gunn truly missed in his movie, and something Snyder doesn't get enough credit for. Superman doesn't represent the best of both worlds in Gunn's film. His birth parents turn out to be evil, and he spends much of the movie depressed about it. We don't get to see his journey alongside humanity because he's already been around for years. We don't get some deeper motivation out of Lex Luthor beyond mere envy, vanity, and power-seeking. We don't get to the roots of this character and his parallels to Moses and Jesus. Instead, we focus more on the immigration aspect of his character and the roots of his creators being Jewish immigrants. We got more contemporary politics and a cheery tone than a story that has a deeper point, and to me, it's just not as interesting or compelling of a story. At the end of the day, while I'm very critical of this film, there is a lot I enjoyed, and I don't want to repeat myself a trillion times as I'm inclined to do, and I don't want to loop forever in this video. So if you enjoyed this film, in an age of strife and horror, with people getting assassinated horribly, with wars going on, with darkness in people's hearts, with death, I think a cheery story about an iconic hero in a classic comic book style, it's pretty damn punk rock too. Especially when we've been so used to, for such a long time, dark and awful and cynical stories and everything. With Marvel movies lacking any form of sincerity, with stories just, frankly, that are garbage. To see a story that inspires people is still awesome. Even though I'm kind of a raging fanboy of 3 films that a lot of people didn't really care for, and they inspired me, and I'm critical of a film that a lot of people care for, I'm still glad it inspires people, and I want to see more stories inspire good. But as a Christian, I'm going to obviously prioritize things like religious symbolism because I believe, not just from my own bias, but from things like universal archetypes and history and myth, that it only enhances a character like Superman. And I believe it's always been woven into the fabric of who he is. So, with all of that, I want to thank you guys for watching. It's good to be back after, wow, that was a really long time again. As usual, the earth turns, a lot has happened, yada yada. I'm very unfortunately unemployed now, so a lot has been going on. That's why this video was delayed. It's been really hard to motivate myself to do things, especially trying to handle all the financials of having a mortgage and trying to keep my head above the water line, so to speak. So for those of you who are religious who watch this video, especially my fellow Christians, please pray for me, all of you, if you would. My wife and I would far prefer for me to, have a job than to not have one. So thank you to all the people in this audience, especially the people who have stuck around, but welcome to all the new people who were, who were sort of the influx with my Has Been Hotel video getting a crap ton of views. Thank you to all you guys, and it's good to finally say this again. Until next time, God be with you.